Camp Concordia, Louisiana, summer 1945. The bread is still warm when Margaret Vogel slides it under her shirt. Her hands won't stop shaking. She presses the stolen loaf against her ribs, feeling the heat through the thin fabric of her prison uniform. One thought screams in her mind: don't get caught. The American camp kitchen is empty. The cooks left 3 minutes ago for their shift change. She has maybe 90 seconds before someone comes back. 60 seconds. She forces her legs to move. Walk normally, not too fast. Prisoners who run always get caught. That's what they taught her at Ravensbrück. Blend in, show nothing, survive. 30 seconds. Her fingers brush the door handle. Almost there, almost free. Stop right where you are. The voice comes from behind her. American accent, deep, calm, controlled. Margaret freezes. She's been caught stealing food from enemy soldiers, and what happens in the next 3 minutes will haunt her for the next 60 years, because the punishment this American sergeant gives her will shatter everything she believes about enemies, about the war, and about which side was actually fighting for humanity. This is that story. Margaret turns around slowly. Every muscle in her body tenses for what's coming. The beating, the solitary confinement, the reduction in rations that will leave her even hungrier than before. An American soldier stands in the kitchen doorway, sergeant stripes on his sleeve, maybe 35 years old, weathered face, eyes that have seen too much war. His rifle hangs over his shoulder, not raised, not threatening, just there. He looks at her, then at her hands pressed against her ribs, then at the clear outline of bread visible under her shirt. You know stealing's against camp regulations. Margaret says nothing. Her training from 6 years in the German Women's Auxiliary kicks in automatically. Admit nothing, show no fear, never apologize to the enemy. The sergeant tilts his head slightly. You speak English? Yes. Then you understand what I'm saying. You stole food from the camp kitchen. That's a disciplinary offense. Margaret waits. This is when it happens. This is when the violence starts. That's what every officer in the Wehrmacht told them. Americans are brutal. Capture means torture, starvation, death. But Sergeant William Hayes does something that makes absolutely no sense. He reaches into his pocket, pulls out a small notepad and a pencil, writes something down, tears off the page, holds it out to her. This is a requisition slip for 2 loaves of bread, 1 jar of jam, and a canteen of milk, authorized by me. Take it to the supply office tomorrow morning. Margaret stares at the paper, at his hand holding it toward her, at his face which shows no anger, no mockery, no trap. I don't understand. The bread you stole isn't enough to share with whoever you're stealing for, so I'm giving you more. Margaret's hands won't move. She can't take the paper, because nothing in her training prepared her for this. 6 years in the German Women's Auxiliary, 2 years as a signals operator, 8 months as a prisoner of war. Nothing explained what to do when an enemy responds to theft with generosity.
Why? The word comes out broken. Hayes looks at her for a long moment, then he sets the requisition slip on the counter between them. Because you're hungry enough to risk solitary confinement for a loaf of bread, and because I remember what hungry looks like. He turns to leave, pauses at the door. Next time you need food, just ask. We're not in the business of starving prisoners. The door closes behind him. Margaret stands alone in the kitchen, the stolen bread still pressed against her ribs, the requisition slips sitting on the counter like evidence of something impossible. The Americans were supposed to be monsters. That's what every propaganda broadcast promised. That's what every officer told them. But this American soldier just caught her stealing and gave her more food instead of punishment. And that single act of incomprehensible mercy is about to destroy everything Margaret Vogel believed about the war. Before we continue Margaret's story, I need to tell you something important. Every week I dig through archives, interview historians, and piece together these forgotten moments when someone's entire worldview shattered, when propaganda met reality, when enemies chose mercy over revenge. And every week, someone tells me these stories don't matter, that nobody cares about what happened to German prisoners, that I should focus on real victims. But I believe these moments matter, these instances when enemies became human to each other, these choices that show us who we really are as people. So please, stay with me until the end, and if this story moves you, subscribe to Untold Captive Stories. Help me prove that complicated truth matters more than comfortable lies. Now let's return to that kitchen in Louisiana, where a German woman holds a piece of paper that makes no sense and a loaf of bread that will change everything. Margaret Vogel had been hungry before. Not like this, not the grinding, constant hunger that turns your stomach into a knife and makes you think about food every waking moment. But she'd known rationing, she'd known scarcity. She grew up in Stuttgart, daughter of a postal worker and a seamstress, smart enough to finish gymnasium, not wealthy enough for university. When the war started in 1939, she was 22 years old, working as a telephone operator for the Reich Postal Service. By 1941, they asked for volunteers, women to support the war effort, not as soldiers. German women didn't fight, but as auxiliaries, radio operators, signal clerks, administrative staff, the Nachrichtenhelferinnen, communication helpers. Margaret volunteered, not out of ideology, not out of patriotism, out of practicality. The auxiliary paid better than the postal service, it offered better rations, and it got her out of Stuttgart before the bombing got worse. They stationed her in France, then Poland, then back to Germany as the Allies closed in. She was good at her job. Morse code, signal routing, radio protocols. She could decode intercepted messages faster than most of the men. By 1944, she'd been promoted to senior signals operator, working out of a mobile command post that moved with retreating German forces. March 1945, the Americans crossed the Rhine. Margaret's unit received orders to evacuate east, burn all classified documents, destroy radio equipment before retreat. But orders came too late, or confusion was too great, or both. The Americans overran their position outside Mannheim on a gray morning that smelled like diesel and smoke. Margaret hadn't even finished destroying the codebooks when American soldiers appeared in the doorway, rifles raised, shouting in English she barely understood. "Hands up! Move slow! You're prisoners of war!" They processed her through a forward camp, cataloged her rank, her unit, her role, then put her on a truck with 40 other German women, nurses, clerks, radio operators, all captured in the final chaotic weeks. The ship to America took 12 days. Margaret spent most of it in the cargo hold, sick from the motion, terrified of what awaited. The propaganda was crystal clear. Americans were savages. They'd tortured German prisoners, especially women, especially those who'd served in military intelligence. But when the ship docked in New Orleans, what greeted them wasn't torture. It was heat. Impossible, wet, suffocating Louisiana heat that pressed down like a physical weight. And American soldiers who processed them with bored efficiency, who handed them prison uniforms and towels and bars of soap, who spoke in drawls she barely understood, but whose meaning was unmistakable. Follow the rules, work your assigned duties, cause no trouble. That was 6 weeks ago. Now Margaret stands in Camp Concordia, a converted Army training facility in northern Louisiana, surrounded by barbed wire and guard towers and American soldiers who don't act like the monsters she'd been warned about. And she had just been caught stealing bread.
Margaret takes the stolen bread back to her barracks after midnight. The women's compound is separate from the men's section, wooden buildings arranged in neat rows, housing 200 German female prisoners, nurses, clerks, radio operators, a few Luftwaffe auxiliaries who'd manned searchlights and anti-aircraft predictors. She shares Barracks 7 with 15 other women. Most are asleep when she slips through the door, but Hilda Schmidt is awake, sitting on her bunk, writing a letter home by moonlight through the window. Hilda looks up as Margaret enters, sees the bread, says nothing. Margaret moves to her own bunk, carefully divides the loaf into 16 pieces, small pieces, barely enough to taste, but enough to share. She sets aside one piece, carries the rest through the barracks, places them silently on each sleeping woman's pillow. When she returns to her bunk, Hilda is watching her. "You were gone a long time. I was careful. Did anyone see you?" Margaret hesitates, then nods. Hilda's face goes pale. "Who?" "An American sergeant." "Margaret, no. What did he do?" Margaret pulls the requisition slip from her pocket, hands it to Hilda. Hilda reads it by moonlight, reads it again, then looks at Margaret like she's lost her mind. "This is a trick. They're testing you. Tomorrow they'll arrest you when you try to use it." "Maybe." "Why would an American give you more food for stealing?" "I don't know." "What did he say to you?" Margaret sits on her bunk, feels the weight of exhaustion crushing her. "He said next time I should just ask." Hilda stares at her. "Ask?" "That's what he said." "The Americans are our enemies, Margaret. They don't give prisoners food for asking." "Then why did he give me this?" Neither of them has an answer. Margaret sees Sergeant William Hayes again 3 days later. She'd avoided the kitchen since the night she was caught, avoided him, avoided the supply office where the requisition slip sits unused in her pocket like evidence of something she can't explain.
But avoiding is impossible in a camp of 200 prisoners and 50 guards. Paths cross, duties overlap. She's hanging laundry on the line behind Barracks 7 when Hayes walks past on patrol. He slows when he sees her, stops. "You didn't use the requisition slip." Margaret's hands still on the wet sheet she's hanging. "No." "Why not?" She doesn't answer. Hayes comes closer. Not threatening, just close enough to speak without shouting. "You think it's a trap, don't you?" "Maybe." "It's not." "Then why give it to me?" Hayes is quiet for a moment. "Can I ask you something?" Margaret nods. "Who were you stealing for? Yourself or someone else?" The question is too direct, too observant. Margaret feels something crack in her carefully maintained walls. "The older women in my barracks. They get rationed the same as us, but they can't eat the camp food. It's too rich, too much salt. They need plain bread." Hayes nods slowly. "And you're feeding them from your own rations." "It's not enough. That's why I stole." "Yes." Hayes reaches into his pocket, pulls out a new requisition slip. "This one authorizes plain white bread twice weekly for medical dietary needs. Take this to the camp infirmary, tell them you need medical ration authorization for Barracks 7. They'll set it up." Margaret takes the paper with trembling hands. "Why are you doing this?" "Because you're taking care of people who can't take care of themselves. That's not criminal, that's decent." He starts to walk away. "Sergeant." He turns. "We're enemies. You're supposed to—" She doesn't know how to finish. Hayes smiles, but it's sad. "Yeah, we're supposed to hate each other, supposed to be monsters to each other. But I've got a mother back in Kansas who's probably hungry right now, too. And if she was in a camp somewhere, I'd hope somebody would look after her." He walks away. Margaret stands holding the requisition slip, feeling the Louisiana sun press down, feeling something shift in her understanding of the world. Quick question before we continue. Where are you watching from right now? Drop your country or city in the comments. I love seeing where stories like this reach people around the world. Let's see which place has the most viewers today. Over the next month, Margaret encounters Sergeant William Hayes 7 more times. Each encounter chips away at what she thought she knew about enemies. She's working kitchen duty, scrubbing pots after the evening meal. Hayes comes through during his rounds, checking work details. He pauses when he sees her hands, raw, bleeding slightly from the harsh soap and steel wool. The next day, softer soap appears in the kitchen. Gloves, too. No one says where they came from, but Margaret knows. A fight breaks out in the women's compound. 2 prisoners, both half-starved, both desperate, arguing over a missing piece of bread.
Hayes is the guard who responds. He separates them calmly, sits them down, asks what happened. When they explain, he reaches into his own ration bag, gives them each a piece of chocolate. Now you're even, and now you both have something sweet. Problem solved. Margaret watches from the barracks doorway, unable to reconcile this man with the enemy she'd been taught to fear. Sunday recreation time. The women get 2 hours outside. Some play cards, some read, some just sit in the sun. Margaret is sitting alone when Hayes walks past. He pauses. "You play chess?" She looks up, surprised. "Yes." "Good at it?" "I used to be." Hayes pulls a folded chessboard from his pack, a travel set, pieces stored inside. "I need practice. Nobody here plays worth a damn. You interested?" For the next 4 Sundays, they play chess. Hayes wins twice. Margaret wins twice. They draw 3 times. They don't talk much during the games, just move pieces, exchange pawns, build strategies in silence. But after the 4th game, Hayes says something that changes everything. "You're good at seeing patterns. Better than me. You think 3 moves ahead." "That was my job. Signals, intelligence, pattern recognition." Hayes nods. "Must have been hard, watching the war fall apart through intercepted messages." Margaret looks at him sharply. "Yes. You knew Germany was losing before most people did." It wasn't a question, but Margaret answers anyway. "We knew by 1943, but we couldn't say it. Defeatism was treason." "So you kept working." "What else could we do?" Hayes looks at her carefully. "You could have run." "Where?" "We were soldiers. We had orders." "You were women forced to choose between orders and survival." The distinction hits Margaret like a physical blow. She'd never thought of it that way. She enlisted. She volunteered. She was part of the machine. But Hayes is right. By the end, it wasn't service. It was survival.
The trouble starts when Oberlieutenant Friedrich Bauer notices. Bauer is a German officer, captured near Cologne, transferred to Camp Concordia in late April. He'd been Luftwaffe, a career officer, mid-40s, rigid with the kind of discipline that comes from 20 years in uniform. The male and female compounds are separate, but they share the mess hall, the infirmary, the recreation yard. Bauer sees Margaret and Hayes playing chess, sees them talking, sees the way Hayes treats her with respect, with something approaching friendship. And Bauer doesn't like it. He approaches Margaret after Sunday recreation when she's walking back to her barracks. "Frau Vogel?" She stops, turns. Old habits kick in. When an officer addresses you, you stand at attention. "Oberlieutenant? I've noticed you've become friendly with one of the American guards." It's not a question, it's an accusation. "Sergeant Hayes is professional. He plays chess with you. That's more than professional. He plays chess with several prisoners. But he talks to you differently. I've watched." Margaret feels something cold settle in her stomach. "What are you suggesting?" Bauer steps closer. His voice drops. "I'm suggesting that fraternization with the enemy is a betrayal of Germany, that you're being used, that when this war ends and we return home, there will be a reckoning for those who collaborated." "I'm not collaborating. You're playing chess with an American soldier while German civilians starve in the rubble. You're smiling. You're comfortable. You've forgotten which side you're on." "I haven't forgotten anything. I remember that we lost. I remember that the Reich collapsed because it was built on lies. And I remember that these Americans could starve us or beat us or execute us. And instead, they feed us and house us and treat us like human beings." Bauer's face goes hard. "You've been broken. I've been shown the truth. The truth is that you're a traitor." The word hangs between them like poison. "I saved women from starving. I shared bread. I followed camp rules. I did nothing wrong. You befriended an enemy soldier. That's collaboration. And when we return to Germany, I'll make sure everyone knows what you did here." Bauer walks away. Margaret stands alone, shaking. Margaret avoids Hayes for 2 weeks after Bauer's threat. No more chess games, no more conversations. She keeps her head down, works her shifts, stays silent. Hayes notices. On the 3rd Sunday, he approaches her during recreation time. "You are avoiding me." "Yes." "Why?" Margaret looks at him, at this American soldier who'd shown her more kindness than her own officers, who'd treated her like a human being instead of an enemy. "Because you're making my life harder." Hayes frowns. "How?" "The other prisoners think I'm collaborating. They think I'm a traitor because I talk to you. You're not a traitor for having a conversation. That's not how they see it." Hayes is quiet for a moment. "What do you see it as?" The question cuts through everything. Margaret has been asking herself that same question for weeks. What is she doing? What did these conversations mean? "I see it as the first time in 6 years that someone treated me like a person instead of a tool." Hayes nods. "That's not collaboration. That's being human. But when we go home, when we're sent back to Germany, they'll say I was too friendly with Americans. They'll say I forgot my loyalty." "Did you?" "I don't know anymore. I don't know what loyalty means when the country I served doesn't exist anymore, when the officers who gave orders are being tried for war crimes, when the propaganda I believed turned out to be lies." Hayes pulls the chessboard from his pack, sets it on the bench between them. "You want to know what I think?" "Yes." "I think you're punishing yourself for surviving, for being treated well while your country suffers, for finding out that the enemy wasn't what you were told." He starts setting up the chess pieces. "Your move." Margaret looks at the board, at the pieces arranged in their starting positions, at the choice in front of her. She moves her pawn forward. In June 1945, the mail system finally works consistently. The Red Cross has established channels. Letters can flow between Germany and America. Heavily censored, delayed by weeks or months, but flowing. Margaret receives her first letter from home on a Tuesday morning. It's from her sister Clara, still in Stuttgart, living in what remains of their parents' apartment building. The letter is 3 pages long. Clara writes about starvation, about the black market, about American occupation forces, about the trials beginning in Nuremberg. But the last paragraph stops Margaret's heart. "We heard from Frau Bauer that you've been seen fraternizing with American soldiers in the prison camp, that you play games with them, that you smile and laugh while we starve. I don't want to believe it, Margaret. Please tell me it's not true. Please tell me you haven't forgotten who you are." Margaret sits on her bunk, hands shaking. Bauer had written home, told his wife, who told Margaret's sister. The poison is already spreading. She could write back, could deny it, could say Bauer was lying, that she'd been a model prisoner, that she'd never spoken to an American except when required. She could save her reputation. Or she could tell the truth. That night, Margaret writes 2 letters. Letter 1, to her sister. "Dear Clara, what Herr Bauer told you is true. I have spoken with American soldiers. I have played chess with a sergeant named William Hayes. I have smiled. I will not apologize for this. The Americans who guard us here have fed us, housed us, and treated us according to the rules of war. They could have starved us. They could have beaten us. Instead, they gave us dignity. I know Germany is suffering. I know you're hungry, and I carry that guilt every day. But punishing myself by refusing kindness doesn't feed you. It just makes me cruel. The war is over, Clara. The regime is gone, and we have to decide what kind of people we'll be in whatever comes next. I'm choosing to be honest. I'm choosing to recognize humanity, even in former enemies. If that makes me a traitor in your eyes, I understand. But I won't lie to protect a loyalty to a regime that destroyed our country. With love, Margaret." Letter 2. To Sergeant Hayes. She finds him on evening patrol, hands him a folded piece of paper. What's this? A thank you. For treating me like a human being. For showing me that enemies can choose to be decent to each other. Hayes unfolds the paper. It's a sketch. Margaret drew it from memory. The chessboard from their last game. The position where she'd finally beaten him after he'd won 3 straight. At the bottom she'd written in careful English, "You taught me that winning isn't about destroying your opponent. It's about respecting them enough to play your best game. Thank you for playing with honor. M.V." Hayes looks at the drawing for a long time. Then he folds it carefully, puts it in his pocket. "You're going home soon. Repatriation starts in July. I know. It's going to be hard. I know that too. The people there won't understand what happened here. They'll judge you for surviving well." Margaret smiles sadly. "They already are." Hayes is quiet for a moment. "Can I tell you something my father told me before I shipped out?" "Yes." "He said the war will end, son. And when it does, you'll have to decide what kind of man you were during it, not what kind of soldier." "What kind of man?" "I think that applies to you too. What kind of person were you?" Margaret thinks about it. Someone who stole bread to feed the hungry. Someone who chose truth over comfort. Someone who refused to be human just because the world went insane. Hayes holds out his hand. "It's been an honor knowing you, Margaret." She shakes his hand, feels the firmness of his grip, the respect in the gesture. "The honor was mine, Sergeant." Margaret Vogel returns to Germany in August 1945. The ship docks in Bremen. The city is rubble, 70% destroyed, refugees everywhere, hunger everywhere. She makes her way to Stuttgart by train and by foot. Her sister Clara meets her at what remains of their building. The embrace is stiff, uncertain. "You look healthy." It sounds like an accusation. "I was fed. We weren't." "I know." They stand in the ruins of their childhood home, and Margaret understands that some gaps can't be bridged, some judgments can't be changed. But she doesn't lie. She doesn't pretend. She doesn't apologize for surviving. 40 years later, in 1985, Margaret receives a letter from America. It's from William Hayes, now retired, living in Kansas with his wife and 2 grown daughters. "Dear Margaret, I hope this letter finds you well. I've thought about you often over the years, wondered what became of the German woman who taught me that even in war, people can choose to be decent to each other. I'm writing because my daughter is studying history at university. She's writing about German POWs in America. I told her about you, about the bread you stole to feed others, about the choice you made